Hi guys, part four. Part four. We're on page 32. I'm reading on the Kindle, so I think they're the same. Like if you're reading the real book, or if you're on your Kindle, or you're just listening. We're on page 32. I couldn't believe my grandmother would be lying to me. She went to church every morning of the week, and she said grace before every meal. And somebody who did that would never tell lies. I was beginning to believe every word she spoke. "So there you are," my grandmother said. "That's about all I can tell you. None of it is very helpful. You can still never be absolutely sure whether a woman is a witch or not, just by looking at her. But if she is wearing the gloves, if she has the large nose holes, the queer eyes, and the hair that looks as though it might be a wig, and if she has a bluish tinge on her teeth, if she has all of these things, then you run like mad." "Grandma," I said, "when you were a little girl, did you ever meet a witch?" "Once," my grandmother said. "Only once." "What happened?" "I'm not going to tell you," she said. "It would frighten you out of your skin and give you bad dreams." "Please tell me," I begged. "No," she said. "Certain things are too horrible to talk about." "Does it have something to do with your missing thumb?" I asked. Suddenly, her old wrinkled lips shut tight as a pair of thongs, and the hand that held the cigar, which had no thumb on it, began to quiver very slightly. I waited. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. All of a sudden, she had shut herself off completely. The conversation was finished. "Good night, Grandma," I said, rising from the floor and kissing her on the cheek. She didn't move. I crept out of the room and went to my bedroom. The Grand High Witch. The next day, a man in a black suit arrived at the house carrying a briefcase, and he held a long conversation with my grandmother in the living room. I was not allowed in there while he was there, but when at last he went away, my grandmother came in to me, walking very slowly and looking very sad. "That man was reading me your father's will," she said. "What is a will?" I asked her. "It is something you write before you die," she said, "and in it you say who is going to have your money and your property, but most important of all, it says who is going to look after your child if both the mother and father are dead." A fearful panic took hold of me. "It did say you, Grandma," I cried. "I don't have to go to somebody else, do I?" "No," she said. "Your father would have never done that. He has asked me to take care of you for as long as I live. But he has also asked that I take you back to your own house in England. He wants us to stay there." "But why?" I said. Why can't we stay here in Norway? You would hate to live anywhere else. You told me you would." "I know," she said, "but there are a lot of complications with money and with the house that you wouldn't understand. Also, it's said in the will that although all your family is Norwegian, you were born in England and you have started your education there, and he wants you to continue going to English schools." "Oh, Grandma," I cried, "you don't want to go and live in our English house. I know you don't." "Of course I don't," she said, "but I'm afraid I must. The will said that your mother felt the same way about it, and it is important to respect the wishes of the parents." There was no way out of it. We had to go to England, and my grandmother started making arrangements at once. "Your next school term begins in a few days," she said, "so we don't have any time to waste." On the evening before we left for England, my grandmother got on to her favorite subject once again. "There are not as many witches in England as there are in Norway," she said. "I am sure I won't meet one," I said. "I sincerely hope you won't," she said, "because those English witches are probably the most vicious in the whole world." As she sat there smoking her foul cigar and talking away, I kept looking at the hand with the missing thumb. I couldn't help it. I was fascinated by it. And I kept wondering what awful thing had happened that time when she had met a witch. It must have been something absolutely appalling and gruesome. Otherwise, she would have told me about it. Maybe the thumb had been twisted off, or perhaps she had been forced to jam her thumb down the spout of a boiling kettle until it was steamed away. Or did someone pull it out of her hand like a tooth? I couldn't help trying to guess. "Tell me what those English witches do, Grandma," I said. Well, she said, sucking away at her stinking cigar, their favorite ruse is to mix up a powder that will turn a child into some creature or other that all grown-ups hate. What sort of a creature, Grandma? Often, it's a slug, she said. A slug is one of their favorites. And there, I tried to change the lighting, but it's a slug. Then the grown-ups step on the slug and squish it without knowing it's a child. That's perfectly beastly, I cried. Or it might be a flea, my grandmother said. They might turn you into a flea, and without realizing what you are doing, your own mother would get out the flea powder, and then it's goodbye you. You're making me nervous, Grandma. I don't think I want to go back to England. I've known English witches, she went on, who have turned children into pheasants and then sneaked the pheasants up into the woods the very day before the pheasant shooting season opened. I said, so they get shot? Of course they get shot, she said, and then they get plucked and roasted and eaten for supper. There's the pheasant dinner. I pictured myself as a pheasant flying frantically over the men with the guns, swerving and dipping as the guns exploded below me. Yes, my grandmother said, it gives the English witches great pleasure to stand back and watch the grown-ups doing away with their own children. I really don't want to go to England, Grandma. Of course you don't, she said, nor do I, but I'm afraid we've got to. Are witches different in every country? I asked. Completely different, grandmother said, but I don't know much about the other countries. Don't you even know about America? I asked. Not really, she answered, although I have heard it said that over there the witches are able to make the grown-ups eat their own children. Never! I cried. Oh, no, Grandma, that couldn't be true. I don't know whether it's true or not, she said. It's only a rumor I've heard. But how could they possibly make them eat their own children, I asked. By turning them into hot dogs, she said. That wouldn't be too difficult for a clever witch. Does every single country in the world have its witches, I asked. Whenever you find people, you find witches, the grandmother said. There is a secret society of witches in every country. And do they all know about one another, Grandma? They do not, she said. A witch only knows the witches in her own country. She is strictly forbidden to communicate with any foreign witches. But an English witch, for example, will know all the other witches in England. They are all friends. They ring each other up. They swap deadly recipes. Goodness knows what else they talk about. I hate to think. I sat on the floor watching my grandmother. She put her cigar stub in the ashtray and folded her hands across her stomach. Once a year, she went on, the witches of each separate country hold their own secret meeting. They all get together in one place to receive a lecture from the Grand High Witch of all the world. From who? I cried. She is the ruler of them all, my grandmother said. She is all-powerful. She is without mercy. All other witches are petrified of her. They see her only once a year at their annual meeting. She goes there to whip up excitement and enthusiasm and to give orders. The Grand High Witch travels from country to country, attending these annual meetings. Where do they have these meetings, Grandma? There are all sorts of rumors, my grandmother answered. I have heard it said that they just book into an hotel like any other group of women who are holding a meeting. I've also heard it said that some very peculiar things go on in the hotels they stay in. It is rumored that the beds are never slept in, that there are burn marks on the bedroom carpets, that toads are discovered in the bathtubs, and that down in the kitchen the cook once found a baby crocodile swimming in his saucepan of soup. My grandmother picked up her cigar and took another puff, inhaling the foul smoke deeply into her lungs. Where does the Grand High Witch live when she's at home? I asked. Nobody knows, my grandmother said. If we knew that, then she could be rooted out and destroyed. Witchophils all over the world have spent their lives trying to discover the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch. What is a witchophil, Grandma? Here's where the crocodile's in the soup. A person who studies witches and knows a lot about them, my grandmother said. Are you a witchophil, Grandma? I am a retired witchophile, she said. I'm too old to be active any longer. But when I was younger, I traveled all over the globe trying to track down the Grand High Witch. I never came even close to succeeding. Is she rich? I asked. She's rolling, my grandmother said, simply rolling in money. Rumor has it that there is a machine in her headquarters, which is exactly like the machine that government uses to print the banknotes you and I use. After all, banknotes are only bits of paper with special designs and pictures on them. Anyone can make them who has the right machine and the right paper. My guess is that the Grand High Witch makes all the money she wants and she dishes it out to witches everywhere. What about foreign money? I asked. Those machines can make Chinese money if you want them to, my grandmother said. It's only a question of pressing the right button. But Grandma, I said, if nobody has ever seen the Grand High Witch, how can you be so sure she exists? My grandmother gave me a long and very severe look. Nobody has ever seen the devil, she said, but we know he exists. Okay, guys, head over to part 5. Bye.